Trust starts with truth and ends with truth. Trust is built on honesty and integrity, and it is essential to be truthful in all our interactions. Africa, the cradle of humanity, the land of gold, oil, diamonds, and endless talent, yet still shackled by an invisible chain. This chain is not colonial rule, not the whip of slavery, not even the gun of imperialism. It is something more subtle, yet more damaging. It is the trust deficit. Africa's lack of trust in itself, Africans' lack of trust in one another, and the world's lack of trust in Africa. This invisible chain holds us back, even when our hands are free. Outsiders often struggle to trust Africans in business dealings, in partnerships, and even in personal relationships. Stories of failed contracts, broken promises, and fraudulent schemes have created a stereotype that Africans must constantly fight to overcome. Too often, the undesirable behavior of a few has eroded the image of the many. This suspicion means Africans must work twice as hard to prove themselves credible, honest, and reliable. The world does not judge Africa by its millions of hardworking, trustworthy people, but by the actions of the unscrupulous few. This is the most damaging chain Africa carries, the trust deficit. Today, we must speak about the need to build trust in Africa by Africans, for it is only when we regain this trust internally that the outside world will be forced to respect us.
Strength of Africa TV presents
Africa, the cradle, the fire, the flame, rich in gold, in spirit, in name. Yet shadows linger where sunlight should reign, bound by the weight of an invisible chain. They said we're free, yet something remains, a whisper of doubt that runs through our veins. Not the whip, not the war, not the gun nor the pain, but a wound called distrust, still carving our name. Break the chain, let trust be reborn.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are at this moment. I'm your host, Adebayo Oladokun, and this is Strength of Africa TV, where truth meets courage, where the past is reawakened and the future of the motherland is reclaimed. Today's episode is titled The Trust Deficit, Africa's Invisible Chain. My viewers, let's dive into the roots of Africa's trust deficits. To understand why trust is such a precious yet scarce resource in Africa, we must look at the roots. Colonialism was built on betrayal. Slavery was built on broken promises and deceit. Generations learned not to trust outsiders because outsiders came only to steal, to exploit, and to divide. But even after the chains of colonialism broke, a new reality emerged. Africans began to betray Africans. Politicians lied to their own people. Elites pillaged national resources. Neighbors swindled neighbors. The seeds of distrust, watered by history, took deep root. And then came the acts of unscrupulous individuals. The individuals that tinted the image of the whole. First, the shadow of the Nigerian prince scams. In the early 2000s, the world was flooded with emails promising millions of dollars from so-called Nigerian princes. It was a fraud known as the advance fee scam. Few people were actually involved, yet the impact was devastating. A tiny group of criminals made the world view all Africans with suspicion. Their actions made every honest African entrepreneur, student, or migrant face stigma. People began to question legitimate African emails, businesses, and even relationships. A single email scammer undermined the reputation of an entire nation and, by extension, a whole continent. Broken trust is like a broken mirror. You can glue the pieces back together, but the cracks will still show. Now to failed contracts and broken promises. Across Africa, there have been high-profile infrastructure deals signed with great fanfare, only to fall apart. Funds diverted, materials compromised, projects abandoned midway. Think of roads announced but never completed, or electricity projects paid for but never switched on. These failures do not just cost money, they cost trust. Foreign partners remember the losses. African citizens remember the disappointment. One failed deal makes the next negotiation harder. This cycle creates a global image that African signatures on paper are unreliable. And that image hurts even the honest leaders who want to deliver real results. Also, personal betrayals that stain a people. Beyond governments and contracts, even personal relationships have been stained. Too many stories circulate about Africans promising love or business partnerships to foreigners, only to disappear with money or leave trace of heartbreak. While this is a behavior seen all over the world, Africa's image suffers more because of the existing trust deficits. Each instance reinforces the outsider's belief that Africa is not to be trusted. Thus, a handful of unscrupulous acts create a burden for millions of sincere, honest Africans who must struggle against a stereotype. Trust is the foundation of all relationships. Without it, we are just strangers passing by. Now, why trust matters. Internally, trust is the glue of nations. Without it, societies fall apart. When citizens do not trust governments, laws are ignored. When governments do not trust citizens, power is abused. When Africans do not trust one another, collaboration dies. Businesses cannot scale. Communities cannot grow. Nations cannot unite. This is why the criminality of unscrupulous Africans is not just a shameful act, it's a national crisis. Every scam, every fraud, every betrayal destroys the fabric of trust. And this makes it harder for honest Africans to be believed. Now, the need for rebuilding trust and showing the world Africa's story is not only one of broken promises, it's also one of rising credibility. There are powerful examples of Africans who have shown the world that this continent can be trusted to deliver. Number one on the list is Dangote, the trusted industrial empire. In a world that questions African business integrity, one name stands out, Aliko Dangote. He built Africa's largest industrial empire, from cement to sugar to refineries. Global investors trust its companies because they deliver consistently. When Dangote signs a deal, it gets done. His success proves that African entrepreneurs can be trusted to compete at the highest levels of industry. He has become a symbol that Africans can build companies relied upon by the world. Also, Flutterwave, Africa's digital trust builder. In the modern age, if trust is to be measured through technology, Flutterwave, a fintech company from Nigeria, has scored the highest mark. The company has reached billion-dollar status because global companies trust it to handle transactions safely across Africa. For decades, foreign investors complained that Africa was too risky for digital payments. But Flutterwave broke that narrative. Today, companies like Uber and Facebook rely on it to process transactions. This is African innovation restoring global confidence. This is Africans writing a new trust story. Also, Ethiopian Airlines, trust in the sky. When people speak of African companies that command global respect, Ethiopian Airlines stands tall. It is Africa's most successful and reliable airline, outperforming many Western carriers. It operates with efficiency, professionalism, and reliability that makes it a trusted global brand. Passengers board with confidence. Investors partner with certainty, and Africa holds its head high. Ethiopian Airlines proved that when African institutions are built on integrity and excellence, they can compete and even outperform their global peers. Africa CDC, trust in crisis. When COVID-19 swept the world, many expected Africa to struggle, but the African Center for Disease Control proved them wrong. Through organization, innovation, and regional collaboration, African scientists and institutions responded effectively. The world took notice. Africa was no longer seen as just a recipient of help, but as a source of solutions. The Africa CDC demonstrated that Africa could be trusted in times of global crisis. These movements shifted perceptions and built a foundation of respect. Now, the role of the African diaspora. The African diaspora has a special responsibility. Living abroad, they are often the first point of contact between Africa and the outside world. When they excel, they elevate Africa's image. When they fail, they reinforce stereotypes. The diaspora must embrace integrity, professionalism, and accountability, for they are Africa's ambassadors. Their actions can either strengthen or weaken the bridge of trust. Their actions, whether good or bad, become reflections of Africa itself. When members of the diaspora engage in criminal activities, fraud, or exploitative schemes, they damage Africa's image and erode global trust. The diaspora must embrace its responsibility to build, not break, Africa's trust capital. Down to the role of the government. The fight against corruption, fraud, and criminality. This is not just a moral duty, it is strategically imperative. Africa cannot build trust while allowing unscrupulous actors to continue unchecked. We must create systems that punish wrongdoing, protect honest citizens, and promote a culture of accountability. When Africa shows that it can clean its own house, it will command greater respect from the outside world. There are encouraging examples. Rwanda, under the leadership of Paul Kagame, he has built a reputation for strict anti-corruption policies, transparency, and zero tolerance for graft. He has turned Rwanda into one of the cleanest and most trusted governments on the continent. In Nigeria, the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, despite its challenges, has made high-profile arrests and recovered billions in stolen assets, sending a signal that criminality will no longer be unchecked. Botswana, long held as one of Africa's least corrupt nations, has shown that strong institutions and a culture of accountability can translate into trust, stability, and sustained development. These cases prove that Africa is not helpless when strong systems exist, and when leadership is courageous enough to face criminality head-on. Trust can be rebuilt, and once trust is rebuilt internally, the outside world will have no choice but to respect Africa's credibility. Now, words of advice to the world. The burden of trust does not rest on Africans alone. The world must also learn to deal with Africa fairly. Outsiders must not paint a whole continent with the brush of a few criminals. At the same time, they must be wise. Always fact-check. If an offer, a promise, or a relationship claiming to come from someone you don't know sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Verify sources, confirm identities, and do not allow a few bad actors to color your view of a continent of over 1 billion honest, hardworking people. Africa is rich in talent, potential, and opportunity. But like any other part of the world, it asks those who exploit trust for selfish gain. Do not generalize Africa through the actions of the few. Instead, fact-check and engage wisely so that trust can grow where it is deserved. Be cautious, but do not be closed. Be vigilant, but do not be prejudiced. Africa has much to offer, but trust must be built on verification, not assumption. You may be deceived if you trust too much, but you will live in torment unless you trust enough. Finding the right balance of trust is crucial. So, with all this, some may ask, is trust really that important? The answer is yes. Trust is the currency of nations. Without trust, there can be no cooperation. Without trust, there can be no unity. Without trust, there can be no development. Trust is the soil in which progress grows. Look at the European Union. While Europe is not without challenges, it is able to operate as a strong bloc because member states have built a degree of trust in their institutions. Look at Asia, where regional alliances have boosted economic power. Trust creates stability. Stability attracts investment. Investment drives growth. Africa cannot continue to be a continent rich in resources but poor in trust. We must break this invisible chain. Trust is the most powerful currency Africa can have. More valuable than gold, more precious than oil, and more enduring than diamonds. Without trust, Africa's riches mean little. With trust, Africa's riches can transform the world. The path forward is clear. Africans must rebuild trust in themselves and in one another. Leaders must earn it through transparency and accountability. Citizens must guard it through honesty and unity. The diaspora must carry it with pride abroad. And the world must recognize it when Africa demonstrates it. Yes, Africa has been wounded by fraud, corruption, and broken promises. But Africa is also rising with entrepreneurs, scientists, companies, and leaders that command global respect. This is the Africa we must build, an Africa that is trusted because it is trustworthy. And to the world, hear this. Africa is not a land of fraud and false promises. Africa is a land of hope, of talent, of ingenuity, and of possibility. Judge us not by the few who abuse trust, but by the many who embody it daily. Fact check, verify, engage wisely, and you will discover a continent ready to partner, ready to deliver, ready to be respected. Trust is our chain. But trust is also our key. If we choose distrust, we remain bound. If we choose trust in ourselves and in each other, we unlock a future that no power on earth can deny us. Africa's invisible chain can be broken. And when it breaks, the world will finally see Africa not as a continent to be pitilessly helped or exploited, but as a continent to be trusted, to be respected, and to be celebrated. Trust is Africa's true currency, and when Africa rebuilds it, no chain can hold her back. The world will not just respect Africa, the world will depend on Africa. I'm your host, Adebayo Oladokun, and this is Strength of Africa TV. If you found value in this conversation, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Deezer. Watch out for the next episode. You don't want to miss it. Until then, tell your own story, because Africa's future is written in African ink. Stay rooted, stay bold, and stay Africa. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.
Africa, the cradle, the fire, the flame, rich in gold, in spirit, in name. Yet shadows linger where sunlight should reign, bound by the weight of an invisible chain. They said we're free, yet something